So in this episode, we're going to be doing sanding with our ETS EC150/5 sander and our DTS 400 sander. Let's get to it. So with the legs drying out in the clamps, I can focus on the tabletop. Now I'd already glued this up, put it in the clamps, pulled it back out, and then I ran it through the router table and put that round over on the edges. Now I can focus on sanding. You could sand everything once it's all assembled with the legs and the apron. I find it much easier just to do it piecemeal. I can sand the top separately, the legs separately, and then the apron separately. So I've got, starting out with 80 grit because I've got a little bit of glue left on here, so that'll knock down the glue. I can jump up to 100, 120, maybe 150. I don't like going any higher than that because it'll affect the finish. From there, we can start sanding everything else. I'm going to be using the ETS EC150. It's a 6-inch random orbit sander, like I said, with 80 grit to start out. So we'll get started and go from there. So for the ETS EC150, I'm going to turn the suction all the way up. For sanding this bare wood, I'm just going to run the speed of the sander all the way at 6. So I started out with 80 grit abrasive on here. I could have started with 100 grit. I would have had to sand much longer. You always want to start with a lower grit. That way you're not forcing yourself to put a lot of pressure on the sander. Everybody's guilty of it. They start with a higher grit thinking they're not going to have to sand as long, but then they force the sander down. When you do that, you slow down the orbit of the abrasive or the pad, and that creates swirl marks. So to overcome that, start with a lower grit, work your way all the way up through the other grits. So now that I got it flipped over, I can continue sanding with my 80 grit abrasive. I like doing it that way. I'll sand both sides at 80, change to 100, sand both sides at 100, and just follow my grit progression all the way up. Now that I have 100 grit on there, I can repeat the process on both sides. Now we're ready for 120. With the top all finished up, we can start working on the legs. So with the top done, we can start clamping this in place to start sanding the legs down. We'll be using the same grit progression. We're going to change up the sanders, and we're going to be using the DTS 400 that'll allow me to get into these corners really nicely. For the DTS 400, since it's more of a light finish sander, I'm going to go ahead and turn the suction down almost all the way. Just like on the ETS EC, I'm going to leave this at full speed. So I switched up the clamping elements a little bit here to hold the leg in an upright position, and now I'm going to switch over back to my ETS EC150/5. So we've got the tabletop sanded, I've sanded the legs, and I went ahead and sanded the aprons as well. So now I can work on placement of the legs, cut the aprons to fit, and then bring it all together so we have a finished table. To continue the build video, click here or check this out. And don't forget to subscribe.